and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I am Coach Redpill, joined as always by Dr. Benway, and we're going to be discussing something pretty interesting, which is what can be learned from studying socialist critiques of society when you aren't a socialist. Benway, would you like to expand on that? Because it's your topic idea, and I think it's really brilliant, quite frankly, because I think that so many people on our side of the fence sort of like say socialism bad and everything socialist is necessarily bad. And I think that that's a huge mistake. You?
Yeah, so let me start with an actual practical event. I won't go into the details of dissecting it because we'll save that for the weekly bio, but I'll just cite it as a jumping off point. So a recent bit of reality. So Amazon recently announced, we're making our headquarters in surprise, New York and just outside of Washington, D.C. Of course, they gave us gigantic tax breaks. How wonderful it is. They bent the knee to this amazing thing called Amazon. And Ocasio-Cortez, our favorite little, senpaku-eyed socialist, said, basically, this is bullshit. They get, why the hell are they getting free deals? And I thought to myself, that's probably effectively right.
Yeah.
I think, I don't disagree with that at all, to her credit. And yes, that does raise. I mean, I don't think she's an intellectual by any means. I mean, I think everything I've said previously has gone to that. But it does remind me that there is a tendency in our right-wing society to dismiss a lot of the more intelligent pieces of the socialist critique in one of two ways. I'll be crude and blunt about it. In the first way, it's in the traditional free market religiosity, which is to say, free market is everything, socialism bad, just like Orange Man bad, to a certain extent. That's predictable and in some ways kind of boring. The other way it happens, which I would say is also predictable and just as boring, though I know some in our crowd will freak the fuck out when I say this. So a lot of people say no to socialism because it's usually stuff written by Jews, and they can't deal with that. Our crowd. For example, one of my favorite things that bothers me is how, the culture of critique, that book that everybody loves, and the whole notion of what is the phrase they do, cultural Marxism. It annoys me to high heaven because the people that they cite as exemplars of that are frankly in agreement with them on core principles more so than they know. Particularly the Frankfurt School, which is, I've been on a long rant and saying that you people on our side critique the Frankfurt School at their peril. Right. So who are the Frankfurt School people? Well, they're a small collection of Marxists out of the University of Frankfurt, I believe, around, let's say, before World War II and pretty much going after it.
Right.
And some of their legacy lives to this day. They were very big on understanding, or their critique was that, hey, look, we acknowledge the socialist revolution is failing. They even acknowledge that the Russian experiment is a failure. And their attitude is, well, what is kind of going on here? And they're realizing that the mechanisms of the Enlightenment itself and the mechanisms by which capitalism gets its hands around culture and promulgates it effectively denatures and breaks a lot of the ways that you would kind of go about liberating people from a lot of the bullshit that's tied to that. I'm very much simplifying it down, but that's very similar to kind of what we're kind of saying here. I don't want to monopolize the conversation in a press piece right now. I want to sort of turn it to you, and I can keep going on about this, but
no, well, I think that let's go piece by piece. Okay. Let's go backwards a little bit. First of all, the notion that a lot of people object to socialism because Jews are at the forefront of socialist theory, I am not quite sure I can buy that, probably because of my Latin American background, where socialism was, and continues to be, quite frankly, a very powerful movement in Latin American politics. And nobody thinks about it as like a quote-unquote Jewish movement. Nobody thinks of it in those terms. So my own experience is not so much from that point of view. It's more of a point of view of sort of like middle-class, déclassé intellectuals who were not able to find a place for themselves in a capitalist society, who attack capitalism. because of their virtue, by virtue of them being alienated, or not by virtue, but rather because they are alienated from that capitalist society, from that capitalist market economy thinking, because they're simply not particularly effective in that arena, and they are effective in arenas that capitalism does not financially reward. Intellectuals traditionally in capitalist societies don't get rewarded that much, and so that's why Latin American societies, the intellectuals there tend to be socialist, okay, because they feel alienated from that. But that's one point that I'm not sure I agree. The other thing I do agree. Hang on. Let me just finish the point that's more important, actually. I do agree with your notion that we on the right tend to have this capitalism über alles kind of thing. The market will take care of it all. The market is the panacea, which I do not agree with at all. I think that the free market economics are an incredibly useful tool to allocate resources in a society, but they should not be the mechanism by which we allow value to be placed in society. Because capitalism is useful for resources, but a society's values should be decided irrespective of whether it is efficient in a capitalistic economic sense. You see what I'm saying? And I think that a lot of people on the right rescind on their responsibility of making moral choice and defer to to capitalism to make the choice for them. And it's convenient for them, and it gets an outcome that they want, but it's not necessarily healthy for a society. And I think that aspect of, well, it's not quite Marxist socialist criticism of capitalist societies, but it goes in a direction that I agree with insofar as socialists are concerned, that capitalism cannot be the be-all, end-all. It's just one more part of a healthy society.
Well, socialism is one of the critiques that made the first clearest articulation of the totalizing effect of a capitalist way of life, right? Think about it this way from a lot of the right-wing folks. A lot of right-wing folks probably think that any deviation of capitalism will inherently lead to a kind of top-down Marxist command-controlled economy where we're all in breadlines.
Right.
Which is in some sense just accepting the capitalist dogma outright, saying like there's nothing outside of this, much like the idea that there's nothing outside of liberalism.
Right.
At the end of the day, especially in America, we kind of think that way.
Yeah.
So that's certainly one of the key things. You'll even kind of get that out of Marx himself. He says very clearly that capitalism is the engine that breaks down all sort of preconceived notions into a kind of generic energy that you then are consuming. So that there's something vital to that. But there's also, like I said, going back to the Frankfurt School, and they have an intellectual tradition which, frankly, I understand. You in Latin America are saying like, hey, they're not all Jews there, but frankly, they're also not really creating their own intellectual justifications for socialism. They're regurgitating it from Europe by and large. But in that Frankfurt tradition, they make it very clear, something that I think a lot of folks on our side are recognizing, which is beyond the economy, right? Mm-hmm. Set that aside. Very artifacts of culture that you think of as, hey, this is the cool, liberating thing. It's as much a commoditized product as anything else. Mm-hmm. You're kind of separating yourself from, or you're alienating yourself from a lot of the core impetus, the human spirit, the freedom that kind of generates it. Theodor Adorno, the big intellectual leader of the Frankfurt School, was very big in his critique of jazz and pop music, largely because he thought that it just denatures all critique you might have into just a commodity. It's just fake, and it's a cover for your businessmen to pretend that they're hip when they're really not. Think of what we kind of see from the likes of your corporate tech America these days, right? We're building shit in far off countries where we have suicide nets preventing our factory workers from killing themselves. Yeah. We do all sorts of crazy shit and abuse of the system. But we have cool commercials where we talk about hey, I'm the hip Mac versus the square PC, or I believe in equity of freedom of what rights for women, and it's a wonderful multicultural society, and I'll play John Lennon's Imagine, and hey, look at that, I'm covered. I'm like, it's like an indulgence
Yeah.
from the fucking church.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the Frankfurt School critique. That's what they understood, and I think that's right. That's fundamentally accurate.
Yeah. Well, the thing that bothers me about our current capitalism is that it's not capitalism. It's crony capitalism. It's this weird combination of the government and the larger corporations that basically view people as cows to be fattened and slaughtered. It's kind of horrifying if you think of it in those terms. That it's the government and the corporations that are working hand in hand. I mean, we're looking at this Amazon decision to put their two secondary headquarters in two different cities, and they're getting huge tax rebates and all kinds of perks and what have you, and infrastructure investment on their behalf, and so on and so forth. I think that it's just wrong. That the cities are helping a corporation maintain and expand its monopoly, because that's ultimately what Amazon is. It's a monopoly player. And of course, I'm a hypocrite by critiquing Amazon since I'm a Amazon user. But hypocrite though I may be, I'm not wrong either. It is the government that is helping a monopoly, helping it by giving it taxpayer money or failing to collect taxes that the other taxpayers are going to have to bear. And I think that this is a disaster. And it's not going to help the local economies, because what's going to happen is that Amazon is going to bring in workers from other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And those people will arrive at this Long Island City and Arlington, and they will inflate the prices of residences there. And what will happen is that the locals will be priced out of their own markets and not be able to live in their own city. And on top of that, they're going to be footing the bill. I think it's incredibly perverse, and I think that where we are in a capitalist society, it's not as bad as the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact nations and how they applied socialism. Certainly, there are no gulags, there are no death camps. They're not shipping off 10% of the city like they did in Leningrad to the concentration camps, and 10% of those dying in those concentration camps from starvation and overwork. No, it's not that bad, but it's sort of like heading in that generalized direction. And that's
the destruction of humanity in this state, happens in different ways, and oftentimes, ways that you can't just easily pinpoint to like a businessman just went out and went to a poor guy and shot him in the head and, jerked off over it. You know what I mean? Doesn't automatically happen that way. But, we're all familiar with the opioid crisis, right?
Yeah.
Well, what's the kind of sequence of events that kind of leads to that? Well, the hollowing out of a small, community, the small businesses, by virtue of, be it things going overseas, and creating a Walmart store that kind of cannibalizes all stores around you. You can think of all those reasons. Well, when you devoid or you remove from people a lot of those sources of, self-value by virtue of work or whatever, you can see how someone creates an existential
and I
destructive matrix. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think it's capitalism run amok. And I think that socialism is right on the money in that critique, because everything you're saying is the product of capitalism going berserk. NAFTA, the allowing capital to have no borders and be able to float around wherever it wants to, and therefore capital would automatically chase after cheap labor markets like China, Vietnam, Mexico, Honduras, and what have you, hollowing out the middle classes of the more developed countries, causing these opioid epidemics, causing the hollowing out of flyover America. This is unfettered capitalism, and so the socialists are right. They're right, and we on the right have to accept that and work with it, because they're right in their critique.
And you brought up something else that is, I think, very important to recognize. I'll eventually get to why I still don't, follow socialism. I'll save that for later, but I'll give the devil its due now. One of the other things that you had said, forgive me if I'm getting it wrong on the paraphrasing, but a lot of the ideas, like, it's not really free capitalism, it's business in bed with
Yeah.
government and everything. Well, one of the things to keep in mind, and this is again a bitter pill for people to swallow, much like how liberalism conceived of this fictional history of man as living in a state of nature until he conspired with his fellow societal members to create a contract, but whereby they cover themselves. That never fucking happened. And in addition to that, this notion that almost like a fiction that it's the free exchange of business and ideas of individuals and corporations, and it's only this governmental entity that kind of gets in the way, is false, because there is no true distinction one or the other. It's not true from a class perspective. It's not true from the way they interact. And again, just the Amazon still manages to be the great manifestation of this. Look at all of the government contracts they have. It's not surprising that the Amazon HQ2, one of them, is going to be just outside of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
In addition to that, it owns the Wall Street Journal, which again, well, not it,
I know,
but Jeff
Washington Post.
The Washington Post. In our fictional world, we think that the journalists are supposed to be the check not only on government but on business, but basically the check on authority as such. We're all part of the same fucking game. We're all part of the same.
Well, in The Big Short, there's that great scene where the garage band hedge fund, right? They go to the Wall Street Journal, to this classmate of mine of theirs from college, and they go there and they tell him, look, these Wall Street banks are deliberately colluding to misprice these securities in order to buy them themselves, to protect themselves from the crisis. This is massive malfeasance. And the Wall Street Journal reporter says, I'm not going to report on this because it's taken me years to build these relationships. I don't want to screw up my career. And that kind of collusion, that intersection of class and professional interests that intersect. I mean, they keep talking about intersectionality. Well, here's some fucking intersectionality. You have the intersection of class, of the writer, of the Wall Street Journal writer, not wanting to piss off the people of his class, not wanting to rock the boat of an industry that he is inherently allied to because he's reporting on it. And people in our side fail to make that critique. Now, should we wear a hair shirt about it? No, but we should be upfront and grown up about it and say that there are certain attitudes that we have allowed with this rampant capitalism that is destroying what we value. It's certainly destroying the culture that we have. It's certainly destroying the lives of so many people, countless people who are because of education and ability and this, that, the other, class and what have you, not able to get on this rocket ride to the moon of prosperity that has only affected the top 10, 15%, maybe 20% if you want to be charitable. But the 80% at the bottom, they've lost out. They missed the boat. They're watching as everybody sails away on this great cruise liner, and they're stuck eating coconuts on a deserted island. I mean, that seems to be what's going on. And our side doesn't critique this. And before anybody gets pissed at me and says that I'm turning commie or some shit like that, right? I think that the Pinochet fascist dictatorship was a good thing for Chile, okay? I think it raised up I know for a fact it raised up the middle classes in Chile, and because it brought neoliberal economic policies to Chile that tremendously improved the health and well-being of Chileans. So I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a secret commie or some shit like that. But you gotta look at what has become of our unfettered, deregulated capitalism, and this, most important of all, this rescinding of the notion that you have to make moral choices as to the direction of your society and not leave it up to the market, that the market will decide. Bullshit. And this Amazon thing is a key example. Sorry, I ranted, but you know what I'm saying, or I hope you know what I'm saying.
Well, that's the other. Well, there's going to be several critiques. I'm really giving the devil the benefits of the doubt. I promise I'll get to my conclusion of why I fundamentally disagree with them eventually. But one of
Disagree with
another
me?
kind of critique that we had, not you, I mean the socialists.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I'm being very generous to them more so than I normally.
Oh yeah, me too.
But
Me too. Okay.
but
that's good.
like one of the other critiques that I have, and it's not everybody on our side. I think our side's coming much more significantly around to this than they would have, let's say, 5 years previous. But there's still members of our crowd who still thinks that, all sorts of kind of authority or collectivism is just kind of nonsense, or
Inherently
it's
wrong.
evil inherently. And that's
immature.
The thing about that, I mean, again, we keep reiterating the fiction that the individual really dictates a lot of its own things, when in reality, we are always functioning as a collective group. We're always, yes, an individual has agency, an individual makes moral choices, but the individual is in a matrix of other individuals, and that that matrix, operates, in a collective whole. It is subject to social forces, and structures that don't even exist, or that exist beyond the course of, like I said, government. Like I had told you before, I can't remember what episode it was, but it was the idea that, with regard to things like free speech, the government need not lift a finger or say a thing for you to be perfectly censored.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah.
Why? Because of the sheer internalization of social concepts and forces that have begun. Everybody has internalized, and by everybody I mean most large-scale corporations have internalized the multiculturalism is good. Saying things that are an embarrassment to that image is bad. We'll fire whomever kind of rocks the boat for us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There was no government organized restriction on speech that caused that to happen.
None whatsoever. Yeah, exactly. It would be completely illegal. And so a lot of libertarians spout this bullshit that, it's not the government limiting your free speech, it's a private corporation. Therefore, QED, there's no censorship. It's just you got deplatformed, and that's A-okay. Fuck that. And they keep saying, if you want free speech, go and build your own platform. Well, they try, and they keep getting silenced. So on a philosophical, on an argumentative level, that's not true, and on a practical level, it's not true. And so our side has this problem with collectivism, with the word collectivism, the notion of people acting as a group for their collective best interest. Now, I think that that's fucking stupid, because ultimately, every human endeavor that has been successful has been collective. No man is an island unto his own. No man has single-handedly been able to achieve anything. It's always either building on what has come before or working with a team of people to build something. It has always been a collective endeavor. And so this fear of collectivism on our side, it's stupid, it's immature, and it prevents us from arguing and fighting for those things that we believe in, because we're like, yeah, well, we all agree, but we're not going to join up forces because that would be collectivist. It's just dumb, but that seems to be the case on our side. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, well, it reminds me of again, forgive a little bit of Marxist history here, but it's useful. There's a concept in Marxism, particularly with regard to their concept of revolution and how you get from where we are today towards their socialist paradise. They said during this revolutionary period, the goal is to enforce what they would call a dictatorship of the proletariat, namely that you are in a condition where the will of the working class is the governing force in the society, and it is kind of moving it forward regardless of the various structures you would have against it. And people would say, oh, this is just collectivist dictatorship. Why would we ever want that? And the response that you get from the smarter Marxists is actually very sharp and on the money and kind of related to what we've been talking about. Their response is, you fail to realize that we're already living in a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
Which is fundamentally what we kind of just laid out, which is, yes, you can have all of these legal structures that in theory protect the individual and all of that jazz. But the example I like to give I'll give the past example, and I'll give the literally like current in the news example. Past example, remember after the financial crisis, when the whole notion of whether it was TARP at the time or not doesn't matter. They were voting on basically the financial relief, and the initial Congress at the time said, no, let the market deal with it.
Right.
All of the leaders like Paulson and the bankers came back and said, you fuckers voted wrong, vote again and do the right thing. And they did.
Yeah.
That is an example of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie in action.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll give you another example. Think of the European Union right now. Brexit, literally, the vote was very clear that out.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the continual failures of it, like playing games, intentionally bad negotiation. You keep hearing this, maybe we should vote again. Maybe we should vote again.
Yeah, voting until you get the result
until you affirm the status quo.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, the European Union stopped having these national referenda insofar as approving the EU constitution, because they kept losing. They lost in France, they lost in the Netherlands, and that's why the Treaty of Lisbon came about, because the Treaty of Lisbon was basically an underhanded way of getting everything that was in the European constitution and bypassing the electorate. Going back to the issue of us living in a proletariat dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, I would go a step further. I would argue that, in point of fact, we are living in a Leninist capitalist society. And let me unpack that. See, the difference between Marxism and Leninism, or Trotskyism and Leninism, it doesn't matter at this point. Leninism argued that the party was the vanguard of the people, and the party had to essentially guide the dictatorship of the people, right? Well, we have that. But rather than it be an organized party, it's more like a class collective of bureaucrats and business leaders, people who are in the upper echelons of society, who went to the right schools, got the right education, the right credentials, because credentialism is a big thing in this class, right? And they got the right credentials. They never made waves, because that's how you get a credential. You don't make waves. The revolutionary, the guy who really breaks the mold, he is never going to be a part of that class. Maybe once in a while you'll have one Steve Jobs and another Mark Zuckerberg, but they are few and far between. And notice they all, trim their sails and join this collective upper echelon class. I don't know what to call it, but I think that you, Benway, and our audience pretty much understands what I'm talking about. See, so we have this Leninism, but it's class-based as opposed to party-based, and it's capitalist. And this class-based leading edge vanguard of the people uses capitalism to get what it wants, and views the people as just sheep to be sheared. Because I said that they were cows to be slaughtered, but no. They are sheep that have been bred and are fed to be sheared. And so they're kept happy so that their wool grows out, and so they can be sheared every month as they pay their credit card debt, pay their student loans, pay their taxes that are going to pointless wars, that pay for the companies that manufacture the weapons and make them all rich, and pay for the taxes that will be essentially subsidies to the big companies like Amazon, like Apple, like Google, like all the rest of these fucking places. That seems to be what's going on. We have a Leninist capitalist society where the leading vanguard is a class, and this class has to be overthrown. That's my thinking, quite frankly. And that's my rant.
I mean, well, the notion of a vanguard with regard to liberalism, capitalism is kind of interesting, because I think.
Do you dispute it?
It's true. No, I'm trying to think about what makes it particularly different.
Different from the Socialist Party, from the Communist Party?
Because part of the thing in socialism, like when it starts, right, the Leninist vanguard, when it's starting, is it's trying to overturn something, right? So it has a mission and a goal. I think liberalism probably had a vanguard a couple hundred years ago, without a doubt. It had to overthrow kind of so-called feudalist structures, but now it's kind of much like every post-revolution. The leadership is kind of of the current world you're living in are the offspring of the vanguard leaders of the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where liberalism now, because in the Soviet Union, it was very, similar. All of the leaders of the Soviet Union, that inner party, largely would have been the vanguard of the past. They became the new aristocracy, somewhat similar, in other systems, right? In Japan, for example, when the Meiji Restoration came, the current Japanese nobility, or the highest members of the society, were just those samurai who backed the Meiji leadership instead of the shogunate, the Tokugawa, or is it the Tokugawa? Yeah, the Tokugawa shogunate. It's very kind of similar dynamic where we're in now. I think we have they're the legacy bourgeoisie, right, who led those initial revolutions, who were those, like we joke in the United States, you're part of that, locked in the amber of the Mayflower sap, as it were. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. And certainly they do feel as if they have a mission to ensure, right, that everybody's still in line, that we all kind of adopt the same kind of thinking, that we're all avoiding heresies. We're apostates are silenced, removed from the society one way or the other. I'm intentionally using religious language.
Yeah.
But I think that's fairly true. I certainly don't want to dispute it, because I think it's true at its core.
Yeah.
Or effectively, it's true.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the situation we find ourselves in. And it's kind of weird, doubling back on conversations we've had before, as to how liberalism has failed, and how, talking about the Demon in Democracy book, how liberalism and communism are so similar. We are seeing structurally that they are kind of like identical, because you do have this leading edge, this leading edge party, that they are all indoctrinated. They think the same, they spout the same bullshit, and it is bullshit. The jockeying for positions of leadership under the guise of democracy are really just closed door meetings between people, and jockeying for a position internally. It's internal politicking that people on the outside, i.e. the people, have very little choice, very little influence. And whenever they do have an influence, whenever there is a moment when they can shine, as it were, they make a choice that is radically at odds with this modern-day Leninist vanguard. And look at Trump, look at Brexit. Those were they were not the outcomes that were expected. They were not the right outcomes. Look at the rejection of the European Union Constitution. Consistently, the people, whenever they clash with this vanguard, or no, let me rephrase that. Whenever they have an opportunity to actually raise their voice and say what they think, they vote against the options presented to them by this leading vanguard. Therefore, this leading vanguard is illegitimate. It is not answering the will of the people. And it's not answering, and I think here's the key issue, and something I've been thinking about a lot as of late. You see, here on YouTube, there are a lot of very, very sharp people, and we have these internet dramas and e-drama and all this shit. Yeah. Okay, yeah. But it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of these people are very, very capable, extremely capable. But all of them have been alienated from positions in the upper echelon because they failed to get the right credentials as they grew up. And a lot of them were basically just unruly children. Unruly children, in their teenage years, and so they didn't graduate with the good grades from high school, so they couldn't go to the good university. I mean, come on, like, we can talk about all kinds of people across our spectrum. Sargon, Medicare, Ethan Ralph, all the rest of it. All of these guys, that they are brainier and intellectually weightier than a lot of guys who went to the right universities, because you and I both went to the right universities, and we know the level of idiocy that graduated from the right universities, right? And we recognize...
Some would say the majority of the graduates.
Exactly. And we can recognize that the people who are in leadership positions online are elites who were disenfranchised, because the credentialism is becoming narrower and narrower, and it's stamping out an apparatchik that is more and more rigidly defined, ideologically defined in terms of their accomplishments, and so it's becoming more and more disassociated with each passing year, each new generation that exits high school and goes to these colleges and then graduates every year. This class, this leadership class of the top 10, 15, 20%, they are becoming more and more separate, and more to the point, you are growing a larger and larger community of disenfranchised elites or potential elites who have the capability to take over, to organize the revolution and wipe out the current leadership. You see what I mean? You wipe them out potentially violently, and that's my thinking.
What you're talking about, taken generally, like especially when you say, "Hey, look, we got a lot of capable people here. They've been kind of alienated from the situation." That reminds me of the other key element I think should be learned from the socialists of not necessarily of today, but just socialists of the past.
Mhm.
It's the organizing principle. So if your goal is to say the society you live in is in such a condition now that you simply must change it, and I leave not off the table, I leave open however you want to do that. I'm not going to say one way or the other, because that's part of what I'm saying. You have to learn from the socialists who did this already.
Mhm.
They have spent, the socialists have been busy for,
Decades.
let's say, broadly 200 years.
Centuries. Yeah.
200 years of histories of organization and revolution. You're going to learn positively where it succeeded, negatively where it failed. Admittedly, there's a lot more on the negative side, but there have been revolutions that have succeeded. Those lessons of organization, not just like the arguments you make, we do that all the time. It gets to the point of navel gazing.
Yeah.
But how to organize cadres, how to keep people busy, how to keep the arguments going, how to keep your organization in line, how to avoid internal fights and schisms. All of this is learnable.
Yeah.
All of this is applicable
Yeah.
to our side. It's independent of the content of their rhetoric, the content of their program
Yeah.
for the future, beyond just, like I said, the basic organization and how you change the society.
Yeah.
This should be learned. It was even funny how their own side doesn't even know the history. There were a few weeks ago, this was after the Brazilian election.
Mm-hmm.
Owen Jones naturally gets up and says, like, he quotes from Rosa Luxemburg. He says, but I don't think he knows he did. He says, it's either it's either civilization or barbarism with regard to the Bolsonaro. He's trying to make the case that this rising fascist tide is barbarism and our socialism is civilization. Here's what he failed to understand when he quoted that. He did not know, or he knew and he was ignorant of, Rosa Luxemburg's Junius pamphlet, which is where that came from. That pamphlet was not criticizing fascists. That pamphlet was criticizing parliamentary socialists like little Owen fucking Jones, who during the lead up to World War I voted to support and finance war bonds that enabled the German government to start slaughtering millions of their fellow proletariat members. She was criticizing them for their strategy of participating in the parliamentary system, going along with it, and being nothing but lickspittle to the powers that be in Germany. She was critiquing the likes of Owen fucking Jones, and he doesn't even know that. I mean, and this is the lessons you learn. These are the natures of their fights. The whole socialists have a long history of saying, do we do reform or do we do revolution? What makes sense one way or the other way? Why should you think this way or the other? As I said, worthwhile, independent of what you're saying, of what your particular ideology is.
Yeah.
This is just how humans organize. This is lessons that can be learned. And the great thing about socialist texts, you don't have to pay a fucking dime for them because they don't believe in property. You can just find all this shit online.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that we should take a deep dive into socialist tactics and socialist strategies for winning power and adopt them as our own. That's what you're saying.
Either looking for winning strategies or learning from the abject failures.
Oh, yeah, of course. But I mean, look, the socialists have been successful. Okay. or else there wouldn't have been a Cold
Yeah,
War.
historically.
So
Historically, yeah.
successful in gaining power. So it would be smart to be studying them. And to tell you the truth, it's not something that had really occurred to me. But yeah, I think that we're in the same boat because the thing is, my problem with the current paradigm is that it's so goddamn corrupt and so closed off. And everything is a matter of degrees. If the current system were less corrupt, if the current system allowed for true capitalist failure, if the current system allowed for real electoral choice, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I'd be like, okay, whatever, you know. But from my point of view, is there is a corruption between the governments and the larger private corporations, and there is a view by these elites that the people are just sheep to be sheared. There is also this issue that the profits are private, but the losses are socialized. And
Right.
most important of all, it seems to me, there is a failure to understand that the family is the atom of a society, and the family, the mother and the father, and the mother taking care of the children while the father earns a living, that is the atom of a society, and that has to be protected at all costs. And policies should be implemented for the benefit of families, not individuals, families. And it has to be a guiding principle. And I think that, it's something to think about. How can I put it? Of us becoming our side, becoming basically familial communists, if you will. I don't know how to put it in that sounds an awkward phrase, but you see what I'm saying.
I'll phrase it this way. It was no accident when I sent that idea that I phrased it as, what can we learn from the socialist critiques of society when you're not a socialist?
Yeah.
I did not say how you can be, how we can adopt the socialist program.
No, fuck
or
that.
The socialist go forward plan. And that's the key bit there. So yes, the critiques are very solid. If you you should frankly read Marx. I mean, I don't mean you, coach. I mean,
all of us.
you, the audience, or for everybody. It's worthwhile. There's particularly his earlier stuff when he's actually recognizing the problem.
Well, I'm thinking of
the
reading...
problem is, and where we have to differentiate is that the program, their vision for the future, is a hot mess. It's basically liberalism on steroids.
Right.
That's kind of the source you have. As I think my favorite line of Chekhov was that I'm not really good at coming up with the solutions. I'm just very good at articulating the question very well.
Right.
I think that's kind of the situation you're in with that. They help articulate the question pretty decently a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, in my own case, I have a very clear vision of the society that I'd like us to see. I'd like us to see a society where the family is the nucleus, and also, the family is the basic atom of the society, and also, the government does not save people. The people have to fend for themselves. And it will be tragic that a lot of people will suffer quite a bit, but that's the cost of it. That's the cost of having a healthy, vibrant society. You have to leave it such that people have to fend for themselves, and therefore it will oblige people to become more attached to one another as opposed to attached to an impersonal government that just writes out a check. I think that that's the important thing long term. I mean, do you want to be in a society where everybody is beholden to a check, everybody's waiting for that Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern when the EBT transfer happens and you have money on your EBT card so you can go and buy food at the tit of the government, No, you want to be able to depend on the people around you, your family, your neighbors, those people, the people who know you. And only the people who know you will be able to help you in a just way, because the people who know you, they will be able to tell, oh, he's a lazy bum, or, oh, some awful tragedy has befallen him and his family, and we need to help him. You see what I'm saying?
Or taking it even broadly, do you really want to depend on this idea of a centralized, large-scale legislative process to take care of all those details? It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The whole idea of the legislature is even predicated being, not necessarily being anti-community in certain respect. It's just
Yeah.
a collection of votes.
Yeah.
That's certainly a piece of it. And the one thing I want to do, it may feel tangential, but I think it's related. It's unsurprising to me, a couple of the books that we've read
Mm-hmm.
on this topic, the critique of liberalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Professor Deneen's book, The Demon and Democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It is no shock to me that both of them very clearly articulating the critiques of liberal democracy and capitalism as a species of that genus,
Mm-hmm.
right? No shock to me that both of them, very big on family and being against it, but they're both have a vision of a way out of it. One, Lejutko explicitly, Deneen implicitly, that the only kind of ethos you can get towards that
Mm-hmm.
largely comes from the church,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the Catholic Church, but any kind of church almost could
Yeah.
do. It's not a shock to me that was the conclusion, and I think there's probably meat there.
Yeah,
I don't know how it's successful.
It would have to be a more conservative, more judgmental church than we currently have. We're actually, dear
at
audience,
the very least, a more robust church.
yeah, dear audience
because
members,
the
we're gonna talk about Vatican II in a upcoming episode. But for now, we'll just do this little placeholder on this issue. Yeah, but you were saying about a more robust church. Yes, I agree.
It would have to be at least more robust. Yeah, and not a church which is
Wimpy,
which feels like
wimpy.
well, wimpy, yes, but also feels like a vacation retreat.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, it's Christmas time. I'm gonna go to the church and smell the incense and
soak up the culture.
And
soak up the culture. And then I'll go to the Thai restaurant that's so good, it's right next door, because it's a plethora of restaurants and a plethora of beliefs of, cute little ceremonies and traditions from yore,
Well, I mean, that's another example. The overlap may be a harsh term, but the connections practically intellectually between a lot of the socialist organizing and the Catholic Church, or not the Catholic Church, but the Christian organizing, that's not accidental. Yes, of course, there is a socialist tradition and certain Catholic, I keep saying Catholic, certain Christian traditions, of course. But if you really think at how the church was successful in the beginning, the whole notion of evangelization, the whole notion of the church organized itself in those early days, very much a revolutionary project.
Yeah, we have to get back into that.
Probably the most successful.
We have to get back into that. We have to start organizing ourselves like, look, let's face facts. We are being persecuted, okay? It's only a matter of time. And to pretend otherwise is foolish. And we had the Andrew Anglin situation that he got deplatformed, and we have the Alex Jones situation. They're slicing the onion, one slice at a time, but they're going to slice the whole goddamn thing. And that means that every single one of us is going to be deplatformed. So we have to start organizing now where we have fairly easy ways of communication. And we have to start disciplining ourselves and getting socialist in our mentality insofar as being the revolutionary vanguard. Being the revolutionary vanguard and understanding that we have to wipe out, we have to, first of all, coalesce behind ideas. And once we have those ideas set, we got to go out there and fight them and take over the thing, And either, we go in by the ballot box or we go in guns blazing. But ultimately, we've got to win because these guys are destroying our society. They are destroying everything that we have held dear over hundreds of years. They are ruining families. There are now 3 generations of women who have been ruined beyond redemption. And we have 3-4 generations of children who have grown up psychotic. And now they're just outright medicating them. And now they're saying, well, let's just medicate the water. Fuck it, I mean, what the fuck does that tell you, right? When they
preventative medication.
Clearly, these guys, the people in charge, the class in charge, that both Benway and I mean, let's face fact, we came out of that class, right? We got the accreditations of that class. And we know them. We despise them because they're NPC bastards. That's what they are. They don't care about anything except making money. And they don't even care about making money for anything, worthwhile, like making a ton of money so you can take care of your kids. No, they care about having a ton of money so they can buy the latest Ford Raptor or some shit like that. Oh God.
For priests of the capitalist church, they are pretty lazy right now, I must admit, or at least pretty lethargic. But to think positively about it, these are the prime conditions for changing the society.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I am willing to bet, and I'm getting feelers of this from listening to people online and in reality. I'm getting feelings that there is a delusionment setting in, right? For whatever, at least in this country, for whatever belief in the hopes of the president doing something, slowly coming to realization that we're getting a lot less than what we thought we were buying.
Yeah.
And I think people are kind of saying, okay, time to go back to games, time to go to sleep. But what I am also feeling is, the desire to do something is still there. And this is the prime example of figuring out, almost like you would in the monasteries in the Middle Ages. You have to go somewhere where you are in a position to recharge your spiritual batteries, clarify your thought, articulate your mind more clearly, and kind of organize around like we're going to expand what we were hoping to do. Ironically enough, it may be the best kind of kick in the ass to do that.
Okay.
That's my white pill of today.
Yeah.
Finally, I got one.
You're basically saying that we should start organizing a group of people,
very much,
especially like a leadership cadre, and start getting some discipline among the leadership, a leadership cadre that starts organizing. That's what you're basically saying.
I think leadership will come of it, but even if you're not thinking of yourself as a leader, start getting yourself organized just in general. It's like, like-minded people. It's like, rather than just,
bitching and moaning about it independently.
Bitching and moaning about stuff. It's like, okay, let's start studying, what's been going on, share the ideas and build off of that. What is like a program, what's our 5 year, I'll borrow more socialist program language. What's our 5-year plan, right? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be in 10 years? All of that kind of thing. I mean, just, looking at the southern border and saying, oh, these caravans keep cutting, Mr. President, build the wall, that means nothing. I mean, it would be a step above if you went to the fucking border yourself and started laying the bricks. You know what I mean? I mean, I not necessarily literally meaning that, but you get the principle of what I'm saying. Act upon it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Get ready to do it. That's kind of what you have to be ready for. And I'm not saying, I have the right answers here. I'm as guilty as every other motherfucker on the internet scene, right? I mean,
but we have to we have to start getting our shit together and organizing it the way the socialists did, because the socialists were effective. The fucking Mao and his little gang, they took over the country. They beat the nationalists. They had everything against them, and all the internal squabbling and all the rest of it, but they were able to get their shit organized and win. And it's happened time after time with the socialists. So we have to start taking a page from the socialist insurgents, because I think that's the key issue. It's the socialist insurgents. They knew how to win, and we got to copy them. We got to take a page from them, and we got to study their methods and tactics. And like you said, learn from their mistakes. Because if we recognize that we are in a pre-Civil War phase, and we recognize that the current leadership is isolated from the rest of the population, and their interests are at loggerheads with the majority of the population, and if we recognize too that there are a substantial number of people who are extraordinarily capable but have been rejected by the elite for whatever reasons, but those people feel extremely alienated to the degree that they are capable. The more capable, the more alienated, because capable people want to be able to use their ability, use their talent in something useful and productive. If they're shut out, the frustration that builds, the rage, and we see it. I mean, like look at a guy like Jim, for instance, Medicare. Medicare, where do you think that humor, that acid humor comes from? It comes from impotence. It comes from being marginalized, because he's a guy capable enough that he could have risen to the top of any organization he'd been a part of, but he was prevented from joining any such organization of the straight society, any part of the elite. And there are a lot of people like him, and we see them all over the place. And so it becomes an issue of resisting this, no, not resisting, fighting back against this current oligarchy, this oligarchic. You see where I'm going here?
There's a lesson to be learned here from everything you're kind of saying about the being marginalized, the alienation aspect, and this is also a little bit of nugget you can get from the socialist critiques, right? Fundamentally, you are not going to be in a position to win by playing the game as dealt to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, not just you personally, but even if you were, let's say you hit all the credentials, you did all the right things, you're in a position to be a legislator, legislator, let's say, you couldn't really do anything that you really want to do, because the rot is
too deep.
It's deeper than policy.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
It's deeper than policy, and therefore it has to be solved by extra formal ways that are outside the established norms. A real revolution. That's what we're talking
about. Right, and it will, one way or the other, it will either it will happen. I'll just phrase it this way, because what won't happen, I will say, is that the current status quo will perpetuate in perpetuity. No historical system ever has.
No.
But there is an open question as to what will replace it.
Yeah. Well,
it can certainly be something that we want, or it could be any number of other things. It could be, in Europe, for example, an Islamic point of view of the world. It could be here in a kind of extended, lukewarm socialism. It could be, just the complete scattering to the winds of tribal, disintegration, whatever. There's a question of the degree to what extent do you want to have a role in shaping what it is?
Well, the thing that comforts me is that a very, very small percentage of people have to mobilize effectively for there to be complete change in society. Just a few, fractions of percentage points that are organized, disciplined, ruthless, with clear objectives as to the society that they want to achieve. And it can be achieved. It's happened in every socialist revolution. Every socialist revolution started with a few dozen people who decided, we're going to do this, and eventually they did it. And they had a clear vision of the kind of society that they wanted to have. And I think that the first thing we have to do, therefore, is to, on the one hand, study socialist tactics and socialist failures, and on the other, articulate a clear, coherent vision of the society that we want. And I have a few ideas about it, but like I said before, it's basically centered on the notion of the family, and that women have to raise children and men have to provide for those families. And that should be the number one priority of this vision. And that capitalism is a tool at the service of society, not the other way around. Society, the civilization that we have, is not a feeding box, a feeding bowl that capitalism, like a pig, gets to gorge upon. No. Capitalism is an engine, a very useful engine, but it's just an engine. And it should be regulated and managed so as to help the society and not hurt it. That's my thinking.
And this involves more than reading Saul Alinsky, I must say. I mean, I think this is like that's the baby step. People are realizing, like, oh, maybe we should take lessons from Saul Alinsky, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's for the LARPers. It's for LARPers. It has to be.
Saul Alinsky never seized control of a state. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. No, it has to be. It has to be something more profound. Look. a man will die for a vision. Okay, tactics are all great and useful. Strategies are all great and useful, but you need a vision of a world you want to have. It has to be a clear vision of what you want to see, of what kind of society you want to have, and it has to be articulated in a way that anybody can understand it, and that there are ways to reach it, and it's within the realms of the possible. I mean, like in my own case, I see so many women, young women, and they are getting this very expensive education. They're saddling themselves with all of this debt, and they go in for more and more education because they're like gamblers. They think that, oh, well, I only have a BA, so I'll get an MA too, because that'll help me. I'll get a better job because of it. And then they realize that with an MA, there are going to be countless others. So they say, oh, I'll double down and get a PhD, and somehow, they invest all of this time and effort into their education or their career. And at the end of it, they get nothing. They're just saddled with debt. They become these slaves to the debt. They have no family of their own because they sacrificed their best years to raise a family, to have children, beautiful, wonderful children. They sacrifice those years for what? To study things that are pointless, to pursue a career that does not help them, that actually makes them miserable most of the time, and they get no satisfaction. At the end of the day, a corporation can fire you. You exit the university with your PhD and no job, right? And what do you have to show for it? Whereas a woman with children, she's got something. They're hers forever, and the love and affection that they will give her is something that will always be with her, as opposed to some crappy little job or some shitty little career or some foolish degree in some nonsensical subject. And it seems to me that women are the core issue here. We have to convince women, and they have to understand that the thing that they have been sold is wrong. And to tell you the truth, thinking about it as we're talking, I'm realizing that it's the women that have to be convinced. Because once the women are convinced, it's like religion. See, the first proselytizers of religion are usually the women. The Roman women were the ones who brought in Christianity and made it something until it grew and became the religion of Rome, right? It's women, and women are the key. And so we have to figure out a strategy to figure out a way to make women see what's going on, see the damage that they are inflicting upon themselves, see how it is a construct that helps only the capitalists, only the oligarchs, because their work, the sacrifice, them sacrificing the best years of their lives to have families, only help to drive down the price of wages for the oligarchs. It doesn't help women. It makes them miserable. And we have to show that to them. We have to show women this wider world to understand what's going on. And there, I think we'd have a powerful ally. I think the women are the key. I don't know how this sounds to you.
Certainly a potential path forward. Let's put it this way. You're going to have, if you think the family is the atom of the society, you're at least going to have to convince the family as a whole.
Right.
That's going to include a few women, shall we say.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, this has been an interesting conversation. And I think it took a weird divergence from an airless discussion into sort of like the beginnings of political organization. But yeah, I think that, look, I don't think that we're unique in this of like wanting something to change, something substantial to change. Because I think that you and I think agree that the way things are is just a disaster. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way. And there has to be a change, a ground up change, something radical. Or else, all of our civilization will be destroyed. We're already seeing it in Europe, for crying out loud. It's being overrun by people who care nothing for that civilization. That they only see it as a foreign land to be looted. When I saw that picture of the new mayor of Sheffield, was it? This black guy who decided that he was not going to wear a red poppy for Remembrance Day. He was going to wear a white poppy. he's just completely disconnected from the tradition of that society. He just wore it. For him, it's just arbitrary. It's like Jewish kids, celebrating Christmas. It's absurd. Or like I went to a couple of bar mitzvahs when I was growing up, and I'm a Catholic, right? Because friends of mine were having their bar mitzvahs, right? And for me, it was just completely alienating. And I wore the yarmulke, and I was like, oh, this is kind of funny, a little hat. And I played with the hat. I used it as a frisbee, right? Because it had no connection to me. It's just a random thing. And the people who are invading Europe, they see all of Europe as just some random bric-a-brac that does not belong to them. And they will destroy it. They will loot it. And I'm not talking about just the buildings. I'm talking about the whole society and all the virtues and principles that took so long to achieve. And it just deeply troubles me. Yeah. I'm sorry for ranting. And this conversation has been more of my ranting than anything else, it seems to me. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's quite all right. I think not the conclusion. These things don't conclude until the societies change. But I think we made our point here, right? That let's put it this, there are lessons to be learned. There are practical activities and lessons to be learned. And let's get started.
And so on that cheerful note, we're going to call it a podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast, and we will catch you next time. Take it easy.
Shit posters of the world unite.